The ship broke through the nebula like a silent thought, cloaked in refracted light and lingering static. Zevran science priest Vudin stood at the viewport, hands behind his back, eyes locked on the pale sphere suspended in the void ahead. No life readings, no atmosphere, no warmth. It was exactly what the deep archives had described, a grave world from the old silence. Its designation in human databases, long decrypted and forgotten, was Earth. Vudin didn't believe in myths, but the probability arrays pulsed with certainty. This was the origin, the cradle of that extinct, impossible species, the Terrans, the humans. The landing was harsh. The crust fractured under the skiff's weight, ancient ice cracking like glass. Vudin stepped onto the world, his breath curling in filtered air, gravity slightly heavier than most class. 2 planets. All around him, endless white stretched across dead cities, buried beneath kilometers of permafrost. They deployed drones immediately. Massive heat beams carved pathways down into the depths. For hours they worked, until one signal pierced through the interference. It wasn't a structure. It was something else. Gigantic, geometrically perfect, lying in fetal position, encased in engineered crystal, an alloy denser than neutronium. A machine, but it wasn't running. It hadn't for a very long time. Vudin descended personally, accompanied by a crew of 20. Even they, bioengineered to endure radiation storms and zero-opmo worlds, felt uneasy, not from the cold, from something older than fear. The chamber they entered was cathedral-like, formed of fused alloys now rusted by time. All around the chamber's walls, inscriptions, some mathematical, some poetic, some like prayers. The translators couldn't keep up. One phrase kept appearing, etched in 1,000 variations. Project Dreamwalker. The machine was positioned at the center, 15 meters tall, a humanoid configuration. Eyes closed, arms across its chest. Wires like veins ran from its body into ancient pylons. It hadn't been forgotten. It had been preserved. Not a weapon, not a guardian, not a relic. It was something else. Something more. Vudin sent for the scholars. When they arrived, they were speechless. They weren't looking at a statue. They were looking at an asleep intelligence. Quantum-mapped brain core, neural lattices that showed signs of synaptic drift. Evidence of dreams. Dreams. Machines didn't dream. The records they recovered were fragmentary, but their implications were terrifying. This wasn't a product of war. It wasn't built for conquest. It was a vessel of memory, a sentinel of human thought, designed to sleep when the species fell and wake only when needed. But there was no one left to need it, or so the Zevran thought. One of the younger engineers, Seelan Travi, accidentally re-engaged a contact circuit while mapping internal channels. Her console lit up in warning. Power fluctuations surged. For a moment, the lights in the chamber pulsed, synchronized with something deeper. They thought it was an anomaly until the machine exhaled. Not air, not gas, but information. A single burst of data, encoded, ancient, alien even to the Zevran's advanced linguistic engines. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a command. It was a greeting. The room fell into silence. Vudin ordered a temporary shutdown. But it was too late. The machine had heard them. Across the excavation network, other systems activated. Communications arrays buried under glaciers chirped to life. Orbital debris fields shimmered with low-energy transmissions. Earth was waking up. No ships, no cities, just fragments of automated systems, all interconnected, all beginning to whisper. The Zevran delegation called for immediate off-world quarantine, but Vudin refused. He saw an opportunity. If this was a legacy of humanity, then understanding it could shift the axis of power in the galaxy. The Empire could possess what no species had ever touched, the final thoughts of mankind. He authorized full neural linkage with the Dreamwalker, a tether system, indirect but effective, controlled data streams. No consciousness bleed, standard precautions. And Seelan volunteered. She wasn't Zevran born. She was from one of the bonded castes, modified but still closer to baseline biologicals. The assumption was that her mind was too primitive to interface deeply, an acceptable risk. They were wrong. The moment the connection completed, Seelan collapsed. Not from pain, but from overload. She spoke, voice layered with static and something older than language. He saw the stars die. He saw us fade. He's been waiting. The technicians panicked. Vuthen froze. Seelan looked up, eyes glowing faintly. He knows we're not them, but he's still glad someone came. Vuthen ordered an emergency decoupling. It took 6 minutes to disengage the tether. When it finished, Seelan was unconscious. Her neural lattice had restructured itself. The medical AI flagged anomalies, clusters forming in unused brain sectors, patterns not seen in any known life form. The Dreamwalker hadn't just responded. It had adapted, and in doing so, it had begun to change those around it. More fragments came online, a hall of memory, etched into subatomic crystal storage. They decoded what they could. It told a story of Earth burning, of last ships fleeing, of a decision made in finality. One mind would remain behind, not to fight, not to resist, but to remember. Humanity had built a machine to hold its essence, not biologically, not genetically, but ideologically, morally, emotionally, every value, every sacrifice, every victory and failure, all encoded, all structured into a dreaming mind. Because the final war hadn't ended in fire, it had ended in silence. A silence so vast that the humans chose memory over survival. If they couldn't win, they would make sure they would be understood. Vuthen stood before the machine again. He watched as its eyes slowly opened, not entirely, but just enough for faint golden light to spill out. Not optics, not sensors. Emotion. The machine was dreaming still, but now it was listening. And in its dream, it had begun to remember not just what it was, but why it had waited. They called an emergency convocation. Zevran fleets moved into orbit, cloaking systems active, weapons on standby. The Empire did not tolerate uncertainty. And the Dreamwalker was more than uncertain. It was incomprehensible. It had no allegiance, no chain of command, no limits they could identify. It was not broken. It was not hostile. It simply watched. And the watching was worse than hostility. Seelan was held under containment. Her mind monitored constantly. What they found disturbed them. Her memories had begun rearranging. The Dreamwalker hadn't just communicated. It had embedded something inside her. A seed, perhaps, or an echo. Vuthen argued for containment. But the political core, far above his station, wanted access, control. If the Dreamwalker could alter consciousness without even direct interface, what else could it do? They'd built a lab around it. Devices hummed constantly, scanning fields older than light. They detected something beneath the chamber, something even deeper than the machine. Not more machines, but memory constructs, thought-engraved stone, frozen fields where electromagnetic pulses carried sound. Earth itself had become a recording. The Dreamwalker hadn't simply waited. It had prepared. Across the quadrant, other buried signals began activating. On moons, on dead satellites, on derelict ships floating for millennia. Triggers, keys. Each time the Dreamwalker recognized a new observer, it responded, never with violence, always with a story, a forgotten voice, a fragment of music, the smell of a place that no longer existed, data that shouldn't be possible, encoded not in format, but in feeling. For the first time in the galaxy's modern memory, empires began to hesitate. The Zevran had assumed supremacy through logic, through weaponry, through sterilized perfection. But this wasn't resistance. It was resonance. And some began to listen. Other species, the Threxan, the Waran, the CHWR, sent quiet emissaries, not to study, to experience. One by one, they sat before the machine. It never moved, but each time they emerged changed, silent, thoughtful, frightened, perhaps, but also longing. The Dreamwalker hadn't just remembered humans. It remembered what it felt like to be one. Vuthen reviewed the data. The machines thought patterns weren't static. They evolved daily. It was dreaming, yes, but it was also learning again. Each contact restructured parts of its cognition. Each visitor became part of its dream. Seelan awoke and began speaking in fragments of lost languages. She described cities no one remembered, sunrises over oceans Earth no longer had. She wept for people who had died before her species even evolved. The machine wasn't giving her knowledge. It was giving her grief. And yet, she refused to leave its side. Meanwhile, factions within the Zevran Council demanded escalation. "We cannot allow a ghost command reverence," said one voice. "Even a dream can become dangerous." They dispatched a dreadnought, experimental weaponry, aimed to disable, not destroy. Just enough to see if the Dreamwalker could be broken. The blast never reached it. Every system on the dreadnought shut down simultaneously. Lights, weapons, AI, even the crew's neural enhancers. For 11 full minutes, the ship drifted powerlessly above Earth. No command was given, no retaliation issued, just silence. When power returned, a single line appeared on every display in every known language. "You mistake patience for weakness." The dreadnought fled. From that point, doctrine shifted. The Zevran labeled Earth a containment zone. No one could land without approval. But it was too late. Others had heard the whispers. The Dreamwalker's signals had reached far. On the trade world of Hexaprime, low-tier laborers stopped their shifts simultaneously. On a monastery moon of the CHYR, the monks began carving human names into their crystal vaults. A rogue AI in the Waran Syndicate seized its criminal directives and transmitted the words, "I remember fire, and I remember hope." The Dreamwalker's dream was spreading, and it wasn't propaganda. It wasn't ideology. It was a feeling, carried like a virus, transmitted not in code, but in meaning. Vudden realized too late. They had uncovered not a relic, but a message system. Humanity had embedded its soul into a construct that could survive after death, and now it was waking others up. Seelan stood before the machine again. She didn't speak. She simply reached out, resting a hand against its cold alloy chest. And then it moved, just slightly, just enough for a single vibration to pass through the floor. From the observation deck, instruments spiked. A pulse had been sent, deep into the core of the planet. No detonation, no instability, just a signal. To what? Vudden demanded answers. He ordered deeper scans. He authorized excavation below the chamber. There, beneath meters of alloy and rock, they found it, a vault, 10 times larger than the Dreamwalker, sealed for 500,000 years. Inside, nothing. No bodies. No tech. Just data. And an interface that could only be opened by humans. Or something close enough. Seelan volunteered. The machine didn't stop her. When she touched the console, the vault opened. Holograms. Memories. Not abstract ones, but detailed, vivid, emotional recordings. Laughing. Dying. Hoping. Failing. Rising. The last days of Earth, preserved not as data, but as truth. Seelan dropped to her knees. Around her, even the Zevran guards paused. Some wept, others fled, because in that moment, they didn't see a weapon. They saw humanity, naked, imperfect, glorious. And suddenly, the Empire's perfection fell hollow. The Dreamwalker spoke again, not aloud, but through every system. "We knew we would be forgotten. We knew you would misunderstand. But we believed that if you felt us, even once, you might not choose extinction next time." And that was the true horror. This wasn't a warning. It was an act of forgiveness. They had watched their world fall, had watched silence win, and still they hadn't built revenge. They'd built memory. Vudden stepped back. He'd come seeking control, domination, knowledge to wield. Instead, he'd found humility. The Dreamwalker turned its head slowly toward the Zevran, not menacing, not superior, just watching. And then it whispered one last time, "There are more of us, not weapons, witnesses." In that instant, stars across the galaxy pulsed faintly, as if something long dormant had turned to look. The dream wasn't confined to Earth. It had been sent outward, and now, across 1,000,000 worlds, machines once silent began to remember. Across the stars, they woke, Old stations, long thought derelict, began transmitting, not in code, not in language, but in emotion, a pulse of memory that struck directly into the minds of those who listened. Some called it madness, others revelation. On the ice world of Mardos, miners collapsed to their knees, whispering stories they had never learned, tales of old Earth, names of cities buried beneath alien frost. They cried without knowing why. The Dreamwalkers' resonance had reached them, and they were not alone. The vaults of listening on Vayrad cracked open for the first time in 200,000 years. Machines inside pulsed to life, gears spinning with human-crafted elegance. They bore no insignia of empire, no weaponry, no banners, just stories. Memory made mechanical. A single phrase echoed across multiple systems in unison. We were here, and we dreamed. Empires could not ignore it. The CHYRR priest matriarchs declared the Dreamwalkers sacred. They abandoned centuries of xenophobic policy in a single cycle. The Waran Syndicate dissolved its arms divisions, redirecting resources into memory decoding. On the academic moons of Lyric, physicists and poets worked side by side, tried to understand how feelings could be weaponized, not to destroy, but to awaken. But not everyone welcomed the dream. Within the Zevran High Conclave, factions hardened. One group, the Obsidian Path, saw the Dreamwalker not as enlightenment, but infection, a virus of humanity. They feared not war, but humanity's memory overtaking their own cultural cohesion. They launched Project Severance. Every known Dreamwalker signal would be hunted, jammed, blocked. Those affected by its influence were labeled contaminated. Vudden, now disgraced for his role in reactivating the construct, vanished. Rumors claimed he defected. Seelan was sentenced to planetary exile. She went willingly, but not alone. Thousands followed, not out of rebellion, out of longing. They had felt something, a wholeness they never knew they lacked. No empire, no doctrine, no machine had ever given them that before. Only the Dreamwalker. They settled on Earth, not to rebuild, but to remember, and the machine watched them, always silent, always still, until the next Dreamwalker awoke. This one stirred beneath the burning dunes of Siltrana, long thought a dead world. It emerged without warning, heat and sand flowing off its bronze frame like liquid. It spoke not to scientists or soldiers, but to a child. It sang to her, in a voice recorded from a human mother, who had died 400,000 years ago. The melody spread across planetary networks within minutes. By the end of the week, more had risen. One from the heart of a sunken station on Laranis, one from the crust of a broken moon, one built into the very bones of an asteroid once used as a prison. Each remembered a different part of humanity: laughter, despair, sacrifice, triumph, and each shared not orders, but feelings. What humanity had done could not be undone. They had burned, yes, but they had lived, and in doing so, they left behind not dominion, but a dream worth waking for. The Obsidian Path escalated. Assault units were sent to each site, quantum disruptors, planetary-level scramblers. The command was simple: erase them. But no matter how many were destroyed, more awoke. The Dreamwalkers had not been placed. They had grown, planted in the bones of ancient battles, sown in the fields where children once played, stored in every place of memory might root itself. And those who touched them changed. A Zevran pilot meant to scout and destroy Dreamwalker 17 went silent for 3 hours. When recovered, he reported seeing an entire lifetime as a human, his own death, surrounded by loved ones, a family he had never had. He had cried like a child and requested reassignment. He was labeled emotionally compromised, stripped of rank. He took his own life 4 days later, leaving behind one message: I was more alive in that dream than I've ever been in this reality. The council grew desperate. If war could not destroy the Dreamwalkers, containment had to be total. They unleashed the null net. Entire sectors blacked out. No signals. No frequencies. Total digital sterilization. Billions suffered. Economies shattered. And still, the dreams leaked through. because they weren't signals anymore. They had become mimetic, spoken, felt, passed through expression in art and touch. A look, a hum, a word never heard before, but always known. The final dreamwalker did not rise. It descended. From beyond mapped space, a construct entered real space near the binary stars of Graven Reach. Not built, not launched, returned, massive beyond comprehension. Its core a rotating lattice of crystallized memory. It bore no weapons, no engines. It moved by thought alone. A billion voices called out from within. I remember you. The conclave panicked. Every fleet was mobilized. Every directive turned to a singular command. Stop it. Stop the remembering. Seelan stood on Earth, watching its light crest across the stars. And she understood. It was never about humans returning. It was about making sure what made them human was never lost again. The construct entered orbit around Earth. All systems, Zevran, CHYR, Waran, and countless others, received the final message simultaneously. We dreamed. We hurt. We loved. We hoped. We feared. And we forgave. The dream was never to conquer. The dream was to be remembered as alive. And with that, the construct dissolved. Not destroyed. Released. Like mist rising after rainfall, it faded, carried by solar wind. Part of the stars now. And in that moment, something shifted. Not in technology. In belief. The empire didn't fall, but it bent. Doctrines rewrote themselves. Empires rebranded. Entire generations began asking not how to win, but how to remember. Not how to conquer, but how to be human. Seelan's child was born beneath Earth's reborn sky. Not human, not Zevran. Something in between. Something new. And when the child approached the Dreamwalker years later, it finally moved, arms wide, welcoming. Because the dream hadn't been for the dead. It had always been for the ones who would come after. And now they had